everybody. Today I am feeling kind of crummy, but what's new? That's the life of a limey, right? But especially, it just had a really hard day yesterday doing some infusions and some blood draw and some issues with my veins, and I just wanted to speak to that topic. First of all, I want to kind of unload about what happened yesterday, but also talk about our vein health. I want to give some tips about how we can keep our veins healthy and strong despite constant abuse through blood draw and infusions, and also about why this isn't kind of on the radar of the medical system. I had a really hard time finding these tips and information because it seems that people who are chronically ill or people who are elderly, people who are harder to find veins because their veins have been so damaged, just aren't a priority. And the pain and the difficulty for continuing that treatment doesn't even seem to be important to anyone within the medical community. So I'm going to speak about all that, but first of all, let me tell you about my day yesterday, because it was so much fun. So yesterday was my third time doing infusions. It's pretty common for anybody who has Lyme or chronic illness, because with Lyme and most other chronic illnesses, your body gets depleted of certain nutrients and just like building blocks that it needs to function. So that's part of treatment. While there is like no current cure for Lyme, it's all kind of just puzzle pieces being stuck together and hoping to build you back up. And so that's what infusions do. And I've had a PICC line before. I had PICC line about a year ago for about a year and did the IV antibiotics every day, but I had never really done the infusions themselves because just they're pretty expensive. So yesterday I did my third one, and I already hate infusions. Like I hated when I was on a PICC line. I had a friend who actually liked being on her PICC line and doing her like saline bags and everything, but for me, like, I hate being hooked up, whether it was through the PICC line or just through the regular infusions like I'm doing now. I hate it because it takes just like hours out of your day. I was at that doctor's office for probably like 5 hours, 5 or 6 hours, because you have to go slow and steady, and I had to do several different infusions. So it takes hours out of your day, and I always go there bringing like my laptop and a notebook and intending to try and get some work done, but for me it just never happens. I don't know, maybe there's someone out there who's like really productive and able to keep that no matter what the environment, but you know, you're surrounded by other sick people and there's lots of talking. And I think one of the reasons why I hate like infusions and being hooked up via IV is it just like, I try to ignore my illness as much as possible. I'm not sure how healthy that strategy is, but that's just like, I try to just ignore it and like kind of pretend I'm a healthy person as much as I can for my own sanity. So being hooked up like that, well, first, it's just like a stark in your face reminder of like, this is how sick you are, that you have to be like hooked up to an IV bag for like 5-6 hours out of a day. But not just like a mental reminder, that's a very like mental reminder of like, you're a sick person, this sucks. But also because I'm very sensitive to different just like medicines and things. So I have to go very, very slow and low. And even if I do that, I'm still gonna like be made to feel wonky by a lot of the stuff that I take. So being there doing the infusions for like 6 hours, you feel like crap. You cannot avoid how sick you are. And also the chairs were horrible. This is like a whole nother topic that I could do just on like weird couches and chairs. But like they've got these like basically comfy recliners, like they're really cushy, and you can put your legs out, but I've seen so many people's couches that do this, and even on airlines that do this, where the head part goes out like so much further than the rest. So from here to here, that cushion was probably like at least 5 inches further, thrust further than the rest of it, which is not like that. I don't get why any couches or chairs are designed that way, because you're not meant to be sitting like this for hours. Like, this is totally goes against any sort of physiological workings. Anyway, I digress. But that was like another reason. My back, I already have so many back issues and neck issues and everything, and so my back and neck are just killing me, and it was really painful while I was there. So I hate doing the infusions for that reason alone. And I had a friend I was texting who she's also has Lyme, and she was asking what I did, and I said, I did magnesium and vitamin D and glutathione and tryptate, and I did my first NAD yesterday. And she was like, "Oh, nice!" exclamation mark. And I was just like, that's a really weird, like, I didn't know how to respond to that, because to me it didn't feel nice at all. Like, I'm glad I'm taking those, obviously, because otherwise I wouldn't even be doing the infusion, since I hate them so much. But it was such a horrible day, so to have that person be like, "Oh, nice," like, I was like, okay, I guess. But that wasn't the only reason why the day was so shitty. That was what made everything else get worse, was because the day had already been so shitty. Like, I felt horrible. I didn't get anything done. I was tired. I was sick, feeling my back hurt. You get cranky because you're just like sitting there by yourself, unless you're lucky and you have like a loved one who like loves you enough to come with you for that time. But so it was already a really crummy day. But what happened was that I've been really protective about my veins, because I've noticed they're getting more damaged. I've had more veins collapse, and the last time I went, they couldn't access that vein on my left side, the big one in the crook of my elbow, and because there had just been so much scar tissue built up. And I've been in the hospitals, and I've been in blood draw rooms with people who are elderly, or people who have had like health problems since they were babies, and watching them get stuck for 15-20 minutes, and seeing how much pain they were in, and how compassionless the nurses were to their situation. And I can't help but think, I've been sick for almost 20 years, and been doing blood work after blood work after blood work, and infusions and PICC line, and just so many things that are hard on the veins. And knowing that unless I get cured tomorrow and I don't have to have blood work for a long time, like, it's just going to continue in this direction. And I really don't want to be that person who they can't find a vein on, and is just being tortured every time they need a treatment, or every time they're hospitalized, or every time they need blood work done. So I've been very wary, and I had needed a few blood works for a few different doctors, and I'd held off until this time going to infusions, because I'd asked last time if after they're done they'd be willing to just leave in like the little butterfly thing, because there's a lab like 10-15 minutes away that I could drive to, and then they wouldn't have to poke me again and cause any further damage to my veins. And I had asked the nurses at the infusion place if they thought that would be feasible, and they said yeah. They say no reason why they couldn't do that, and no reason why the people at the blood draw place couldn't just use that. And I did try to call the blood draw place, because I know sometimes like they wouldn't do it from my PICC line. I didn't think this would be as big a deal, because like it's not a PICC line. They can't really mess it up in any way. But I wanted to try and call just to make sure, but they don't actually like have a phone number that goes to live people. It's just all automated. So I did my infusion yesterday, and I was so freaking exhausted. I really didn't want to go to the blood work place. Plus it was getting close to rush hour. But I also wanted to not have to subject my veins to another poke. So I dragged myself over to the place, and I waited like a half an hour to get in, and then I got in and the nurse was like, nope, we can't do that. And I was like, okay, awesome. So they stuck me again, and then I was like, can you guys help me take, like, I forget, I don't know what they're called because I think it's like the butterfly needle, but there's like an actual thing that they leave in. But so it was still in my arm, and I'm like, can you help me take this out? And she's like, nope. She's like, you can drive back over to where you went, or you can try to do it yourself. But if you do it yourself, you should have somebody watch you, because you don't want like to break the needle off in your arm, or like have ruin your vein and like blood spurting everywhere. Like, she really scared the crap out of me on the idea of doing it myself. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll just drive back over there. But I got into my car after finally getting done there, and I just had nothing left in me. If you're someone who has Lyme disease or any chronic illness, you know that like you just get to a point where you have nothing left. And whereas it had been a 10-minute drive to get there, it was getting increasingly close to rush hour, and so it would have been a 20-minute drive back to the infusion place, and then it would be full-on rush hour whenever I would get out, and it would be an hour back to my house, and I just could not. So I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna take this out myself when I get home. Like, I'll wait for my boyfriend to get home and I'll take it out myself with his help. And so I drove home, but I called my boyfriend, and of course he had to work late that night. And I might have like been inclined to leave it in until he got home, except that the nurse who did it wasn't very good, and it was like really like painful. So I didn't want to just like leave it in there for a few hours because it was painful. I wouldn't be able to move my arm, and also fearing further damage. So I was just like so upset at this point. I'm not easily made upset. I've had a really rough road, and I'm able to like take it on the chin with a lot of things, but it was just, I was so exhausted. I was upset about the fact that the people at the laboratory weren't even willing to do that, and how many more pokes I was going to have to get in the future. And that whole scenario, I was just like done with it. It was a horrible day. I wanted to cry, but I had to like keep surviving basically, so I couldn't. So I drove home. I tried to look up instructions on how to do it myself, but I wasn't really coming up with much. So I called the infusion place and talked to the nurse, and she told me some instructions. So I did it myself. It didn't go super smoothly, of course. She had said like put on gloves, make sure your hands are clean, take off the tape around it first, and then pull it out quickly. So I think if I had had a second set of hands there, if my boyfriend had been around, it would have gone better. But what happened was like the gloves are left over from my home health nurse from when I had a PICC line, and she had much larger hands than me, so they didn't fit very well. And then I was trying to take off the tape first, but it's like stuck all the way around, and I could not like hold on to the butterfly to keep it in place while also pulling the tape off. So I was like trying my best to pull it off without jerking it out, because I was supposed to take it out like smoothly and quickly, and it just didn't go well. So there was like a lot of blood, but it's could have gone worse, and I'm thankful that I at least got it out. I don't think I damaged my vein, hopefully, but I'm not happy about it. And so I'm gonna talk really quickly about why this all sucks, like politically, basically, and then I'll get to some tips that I found that I'm gonna try to help strengthen my veins, and hopefully it will help you as well if you're encountering kind of the same issue. I think that it really sucks that this is not a consideration. When I was trying to find these tips, I talked to a doctor. I talked to the doctor who I'm doing the infusions from, who is an oncologist, and who like the main part of his job is just doing infusions. So you think that he or other doctors like him would know more about how to keep your veins healthy when you're dealing with a lot of pokes and damage to them, but they don't. The nurses know a little bit, which is just the basics of like keeping hydrated, which like everybody knows, and it's not always that easy, and it's still is not enough. And then looking online, all the information was about varicose veins. I did find a few small things, but I had to really dig about vein health in general, but 99% of it was about how to prevent varicose veins. So when it comes to vein health, if it's how to keep a woman's legs pretty and not having those ugly varicose spider veins on them, then there's a ton out there. When it comes to help for keeping veins strong for people who are ill or older or have weak veins, there's very, very little out there. So this is an issue. Like, why doesn't it matter? I'm not the only person who's been sick for a long time and has had to have a lot of pokes and has damage to her veins. Like, I'm far from the only person. There's millions of us. There are people who are born with congenital conditions and lifelong are going to have regular blood tests and regular medical workup. And there are people who, like me, contract an illness fairly early in life and have decades of medical blood work and IVs and things like that. And then there are people who, and this is going to be everybody, you guys, everybody gets old at a certain point, and once you get old, you're going to need medical work, and you're going to have had a lot of blood work. You're going to have damage to your veins, and your veins are going to get weaker because you're older and because nobody talks about how to keep your veins healthy in that sense. So that's going to be everybody. Every old person has to deal with this issue. Every person with a congenital issue has to deal with this. Every person with chronic illness, which there are millions of us, have to deal with this. And yet it's not important enough for the doctors and the nurses who do this for a living to look into how to make it workable. Not only workable in the sense that you're not torturing somebody, because when it's that hard to find a vein, they're literally being tortured. I have sat next to elderly people and people who have been sick from birth and watched them being poked for 15-20 minutes and just like screaming in pain. It is torture. And the nurses and doctors are so callous. They don't even seem to care about it. And I understand you have to kind of like disconnect your feelings a little bit because you don't want to always be sad. But there also needs to be some compassion. It isn't this person's fault that their veins are hard to find. And what they're going through is worse than what you're going through as a nurse trying to find their veins. Anyway, so the nurses and doctors who is their job, they only deal with this, still don't seem to have it be important enough. That torture that they see happening isn't important enough to them that this is something to really look into and find solutions to. The medical community doesn't seem to see this as an important thing. Varicose veins, that's something we can deal with and have be important, but veins that are important for actual like living medical treatment, keeping someone alive, that isn't important because we are the voiceless. Even if we talk, we're still the voiceless. We're the ignored. We're the unimportant because that is how we're seen. And that is especially how elderly people are seen. Other people who are healthy and only have to get poked once in a while don't really see this as an issue, but it will be you too because you will get old and then this will be an issue. But people just forget about the elderly. There's so much elderly neglect and abuse, and that's a huge issue as well. So this is like one thing that really makes me angry and needs to change, and there needs to be a voice to this. I'm sure that with all our technology today, all our information, the solution is not impossible. There just needs to be that caring, that will. The flip side of that is that there is a semi-solution to someone who's going through, like, say, cancer treatment, or like I was doing the IV antibiotics last year, whereas you can get a port put in directly by your heart, or a PICC line put into your arm that will lead to your heart, so that every time you need that treatment or that infusion, you can be hooked up and it's not damaging your vein every single time. However, the part that makes me angry about this is that it's not a solution to not getting poked for other reasons. So while I had my PICC line, if I had to go get separate blood work, I did have a home health nurse, and I did have people come to do my regular blood work once in a while, and they would take that through the PICC. My home nurse would. But there are people who have PICC lines and ports who are not given home health nurses, and so every time they need blood work, the policy is they will not access the port or the PICC line. And then there are instances like I had to go to the emergency room a few times because of issues with my PICC line, or just other issues with my health, and the emergency room refused to access through my port, through my PICC line, despite the fact that it's fucking easy. It's so easy. I could do it. Like, just give it to me, I could do it. It's like an imbecile could take blood through a port or a PICC line. And so aside from the fact that it's easy, also I have bad veins. And so you're doing more damage by not doing that. But this is just the overriding policy. And the same thing happened yesterday. I thought it wouldn't be as much of an issue because it was just like a butterfly thing put in. It only went into my vein an inch. So there was no way possible they could damage a port or a PICC line. It was just like the same thing that they would have put in themselves. But they still had the policy of they would not do that. And I know that this policy is half-formed because they want to protect themselves from some sort of lawsuit. I don't even really see how any lawsuit could have been formed off of like them drawing blood through the butterfly, but I know that's like a large part of the reason. But the other part of the reason is that they're not trained to get blood via a port, a PICC line, or apparently somebody else's butterfly needle. And this is ridiculous. Like, literally, it's so easy to do. So it would take not even a day of training in their blood work training or their phlebotomy training. So it's just insane. Like, your fear of some really random lawsuit that would probably never happen should not be more important than the damage being done to people who have had veins that have been overly used and abused, as well as this should just be like a general training. Like, it should just be, but again, it's because our issues are not even important to those people, to those schools, to those hospitals, to those doctors. It's not even on their radar. Aside from the training fact, something about the training that leads me into another issue is that there are people who are phlebotomists who have extra training on how to access veins without damaging them, how to find deeper veins in case they have someone who is, more difficult, has weaker veins, or has scar tissue built up. And I think that every person who's at a lab or a hospital handling blood draw should have to be a trained phlebotomist, because I know I have had people who have no clue what they're doing, and this is not even like before my veins were damaged or whatever, just people doing the regular, most simple of blood draws. And I used to have very, very good veins, and they collapsed my veins. They did it in a very painful way. They just clearly had no clue what they were doing. I know I went online to look for a better rated Quest lab in my area, and the first one that I looked at had just 1 star on Yelp. And if you read the reviews, like, they read like a horror story. Like, it was literally just this one guy who did the blood draws. He clearly was not a phlebotomist, and he was clearly a sadist. The reviews read like a horror story. He was extremely dismissive and verbally abusive to the elderly patients and to disabled patients, like a deaf patient he treated like horribly, and just all these other things. If you like would read these reviews, you would be horrified. You'd think they were from a horror movie. And yet apparently to this day, even though they've got 1-star reviews and like 50 of these reviews are about this one guy, and clearly most of those cases he could have been sued for and their company could have been sued for, he's still working there and he's still their main guy. There should not be people like that allowed to work in an industry that affects someone's health and is a painful area. As well as, I just don't understand why they're hiring people who are doing this minimal training, who don't understand how to draw blood or how veins work or any of that stuff. They do like the tiniest of trainings. Like, everybody who deals with veins and blood draws should have to train in drawing blood in veins, like in a real way. It's crazy. Okay, so that's my main political rant about that. Just that the doctors and nurses who deal with infusions and vein work regularly should care more about learning how our veins can be kept in shape and not ruined. The medical industry as a whole should learn more about how to keep our veins healthy in cases of people who have long-term illnesses, in cases of people who are elderly. People should be trained phlebotomists if they're doing blood draws and having to deal with people who have veins that aren't as easy as others, as well as that they should be trained in drawing from PICC lines and ports to save further damage to people with issue veins. There should be some compassion. There should be caring in the industry. Another side of that is that there are so many new ways to do testing that doesn't have to be blood drawn in massive amounts. We've come so far in testing and in technology now that so much can be told just from like taking spit, urine, hair samples, etc. So there really isn't a need to take as much blood as they do, except for that they're just like used to it, and it saves them a bit of money to not make technological advancements. But again, our health, our livelihood, our not being tortured as patients should be more important than that. So that is what I'm gonna say about that side. You can tell it's like, it's just fucking annoying and it pisses me off. But I do feel like people with chronic illness or the elderly, people born with ongoing health disability are just the final frontier in the political correct atmosphere that's going on. There's still, obviously, in all the other politically correct issues, there's a lot of advancements that need to be made, and half the country is still like stuck in the 40s and 50s with things like civil rights and sexuality and diversity and all of that. But there's still discussions that are being had, and hopefully, despite some setbacks that we've had in our country, there will still be forward progress. So I feel like invisible disability and illness is really the final frontier of something that hasn't even been a topic yet, but people who are really being mistreated, abused, overlooked, and biased. Like, the country has like certain biases against. So that's my little rant for today, and now I'm going to move into discussing tips to keep your veins healthy. And I'm gonna do that in my next video because this one went a little longer than I meant, so I apologize for that. But just check out the next video and I'll tell you the ways that I've discovered to try and keep your veins healthy if you're like me, having to do lots of blood draws and infusions and things like that. Thanks for watching.